We are here at the Cyber Challenge of the 2018 Cyberweek in Israel. What we have here is 30 different teams that has been qualified after a pre-challenge.
Here we experienced the Operation Entebbe, which is Entebbe 2.0, a new generation of the Operation Entebbe, just without forces on the ground, but with cyber force and with the help of many cyber security experts here.
With all the technology that's running around in the cyber dimension and in the different SOCs, we believe that there's no replacement for meaningful cyber professionals that are running the systems and taking the decisions in real time.
אז קודם כל תודה שבאתם, זה לא טריוויאלי בעיניי. נתחיל במקום השלישי המכובד, קבוצת למהש. במקום שני, JCTF. והמקום הראשון, קבוצת BAM.
Use this microphone. Okay, so building future capacity is one of the biggest challenges that we have here today. I want to start with the next session. The name of the next session is how do we join national defense with international cooperation? And the person who's going to moderate this session is the Chief Executive Director of the Technology Unit in the Israeli National Cyber Directorate, Hudi Zack. The stage is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Do you hear me? Okay. Okay, now you hear me, I hope. First, I told Manny, had I known I was going to speak after him, I probably would have declined this slot. But I'm going to give it my best. Okay, Manny talked about June 2013, the Snowden event. I'm going to start my presentation with another transformative month of June, which was a few years earlier. In June 1859, which is about 160 years ago, a Swiss businessman called Jean-Henri Dunant traveled to Italy to meet Emperor Napoleon III, who stayed there at the time, to discuss business matters. He arrived at the small Italian town of Solferino right after a huge battle took place between the armies of France and Austria. During this battle, over 40,000 soldiers were killed or left wounded on the battlefield. Mr. Dunant was so shocked with what he had seen and the sufferings of these wounded soldiers that he immediately abandoned his original purpose of the trip and decided to devote himself to improve the treatment and care of victims of armed conflicts. When he got back to his hometown, Geneva, he wrote a book about what he had seen and started advocating his ideas. Specifically, he suggested to create a relief organization that would help nurse wounded soldiers during battle. His ideas started creating some public interest, and after a few gentlemen from the Geneva Society of Social Welfare took interest, there were two international conventions held in 1863 and 1864. In these conventions, it was decided to create national societies that will be built out of volunteer forces. They will be neutral, and they will take care and nurse wounded soldiers during battle. To protect these volunteers in the battlefield, it was decided they will wear a distinctive joint symbol. And this symbol would be a white armlet bearing a red cross. By the way, in these conventions, they also drafted the first version of what we know today as the Geneva Convention, improving the conditions of wounded and captive soldiers during wartime. Following these decisions made in these conventions, Red Cross organizations started to emerge around Europe, and a few years later, the first convention of this national organization took place. In the decades to come, These national organizations were reorganized operationally into what we know today as the International Committee of the Red Cross, the renowned organization now including over 17 million volunteers, and was awarded the Nobel Prize on 3 different occasions. The reason I'm telling you this is not just as an inspiring story of how individuals can change the course of history if they're focused and determined enough, but to demonstrate that international cooperation can emerge and evolve in very extraordinary ways, and not specifically, or not always, through what we perceive to be the normal route of government entities talking to each other and building some kind of initiative. The title of this session is Going from National Defense to International Strategy. I would argue that in cyberspace, international cooperation started way before governments started taking a structured effort to build their defense or to protect themselves. Since the mid-90s, when the internet started to emerge in the form we know today, there were informal and semi-formal initiatives of individual experts and commercial organizations trying to address the security problem. Organizations like the North American Network Operators Group, like I'm the Cavalry, and more recently the Cyber Threat Alliance, had a huge impact on our ability to run the internet more or less smoothly. Later on, the emergence of the different ISACs, information sharing and analytics centers, and the cooperation between sectorial and national CERTs also proved to be very beneficial in fighting cyber attacks through information sharing between these entities. Governments really started to build cohesive cyber defense strategy in this decade, and as a result create some kind of organizations to deal with national cyber defense. Israel, led by Professor Ben Israeli, was one of the pioneers of this process, establishing the Israeli, in 2012, the Israeli National Cyber Bureau, whose current reincarnation is the Israeli National Cyber Directorate, which I am a part of. These organizations have 2 very different areas of responsibility. One is policy making, and the other is operational responsibility. In terms of the operational responsibility, it is important to understand that these national defense organizations have very unique challenges and limitations compared to organizations merely trying to protect themselves. These challenges include, for example, a much larger footprint to protect than most organizations, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of endpoints. This footprint is very defragmented because it goes down to thousands or millions of unrelated networks with very different sizes and security architecture. We also need to adhere to very strict legal limitations, which are very different, again, from an organization who needs to protect itself. And we have different needs and objectives in our use of investigation and threat intelligence information. So these fundamental changes drive very different solutions and processes than the more prevalent ones that exist in the market that were predominantly built to support enterprises and individuals. And these solutions and processes are still very much work in progress. However, in terms of policy, we are starting to see in recent years some cooperation, international cooperation between these entities, both in the public and in less public manners. For example, you could see only last year a few announcements by multiple countries, mostly led by the US, attributing cyber attacks to other countries like Russia or Iran, something that we could not have imagined only a few years ago. As the cyberspace has no political or geographical boundaries, the attackers will continue to exploit the global, open, and relatively anonymous nature of the internet to attack us. International cooperation between individuals, organizations, and countries is deemed critical to enable to mitigate this surge of attacks. International agreed upon policy initiatives can sometimes have a much more profound and significant impact on the cyber landscape than some technological breakthrough offered by the industry. These initiatives can be, for example, shifts in legal liability, defining clearly guilty parties for a product that was supplied with known vulnerabilities, something which is becoming extremely critical in the new age of IoT. Another option would be harmonizing cyber regulation across countries. The lack of this harmonization definitely hinders our ability to fight attacks and attackers in a coherent way globally. Going a bit forward, we can think about sanctioning countries for violating agreed upon cyber norms, like we do today for nuclear, or trying to do for countries violating the nuclear regulation. But to do that, we need determined leaders and empowered officials. The road is long and it's not going to be easy, but as we learned from Jean-Henri Dunant, we should not be discouraged. So with that in mind, I want to I have the privilege and the honor to have in this session two determined and empowered leaders, which are both great friends of Israel. The first speaker is Mr. Kieran Martin. Kieran Martin is the CEO of the UK National Cybersecurity Centre, NCSC. He was appointed to his current position in 2016 after serving as the Director General of Cybersecurity in GCHQ, which is the British equivalent of A200. Prior to his role in GCHQ, Kieran held various positions in the Cabinet Office and Her Majesty's Treasury. He's a graduate of Hertford College in Oxford, and he describes his main goal as making the UK the safest place to live and do business online. Kieran, please.